So the government has far more flexibility than we do to spend money that it doesn't have. Compared to you and me, it can borrow and not pay back for a long time, if ever. For you and me, that would end with bankruptcy and never getting a loan again. So why doesn't the government just create some money to pump into the economy and give it a sugar hit? Why does it need to keep within a budget? Well, maybe creating money just will be a sugar hit that doesn't last long, because soon after we'll realize there's so much more money around, it's all worth that little bit less, and so nobody's really better off. Well, that's what Milton Friedman argued anyway. So does that mean the idea of a boost from government coffers will never work? That's today on the Debunking Economics podcast with Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. Well, modern monetary theory suggests that we can produce extra money to fund spending programs so long as we keep a track on inflation. That is the big concern. They admit to that, which is pretty similar, I guess, to the views of Keynes, in that public spending can pump prime the economy when the going is tough. But Milton Friedman, Steve, argued the opposite, didn't he? Because of what he called nominal value. If there's basically twice as much money, each unit of money is worth half as much. Ultimately, I pay twice as much for each good. I want to be paid twice as much. So in effect, what's changed? The effect of pump priming the economy or creating extra money to try and stimulate the economy. According to Friedman, that's not going to work.
Yep, that's Friedman, and he makes a very convincing little model, which starts with a trivial, really trivial assumption that the economy is already in full employment. And therefore, what you're trying to do is to boost unemployment below what he calls the natural rate. Now, if there was such a thing, and if you were at that point, no Keynesian government would be trying to stimulate in the first place. Okay, so what he's saying is that if we're already in perfection and you try to make things better, you'll make things worse. And that is something that anybody, even in MMT, would say, yeah, we say that all the time. If you think the economy is already in full employment, if it is already in full employment, and you try to make it below that level, of in sense, if you try to make the market economy absorb 100% of everybody who wants a job, and you're already at the 100% of those who want a job, and the other ones that aren't working, are like your grandmother, that you don't want to have to work in the first place, and you want to get her into workforce. Well, yes, you're going to cause inflation.
But I mean, why would? But the point of inflation is not because of wages being pushed up through demand. His point about nominal value is that we just get used to the fact that things we just adjust. Basically, we go, oh, well, this £1 is actually worth what was worth 50p a few months ago, and we just become accustomed to the fact. So what's the level of employment got to do with that? How does that change the shape of it?
Well, because if you're below what he calls the natural rate, then his mental picture, of course, is if you're below the natural rate, the economy will tend back to equilibrium and return to the natural rate. Keynes's point and the point of non-orthodox thinkers in general is that the economy frequently ends up in a situation of less employment than people would actually want. And Keynes's way of saying that was that there are people who wish to work at the going wage, but for whom there are no jobs.
Right.
And so there's a part of unemployment which is called frictional, in the sense that if you have had jack of your boss and you think, I'm getting out of here, and you resign, but there's a vibrant labour market, so it's 4 to 8 weeks you'll have another job. That's frictional. Or if you've resigned from one because you're going to go to another and you're temporarily on the unemployed, that's frictional. But what Keynes is talking about, and remember this is all discussed in relation to the Great Depression, which is one Keynes was writing. 30% of the population, with America, 26% of the population was out of a job at the peak of the Great Depression. And applying Friedman's thinking to that situation, it was because wages were too high. Now, there were at various times attempts to cut wages, which made the situation worse. Unemployment rose after cutting wages. So he's arguing that if in one sense, the only way that you can look at that number and put it into Friedman's framework is to say that people weren't working because they didn't think wages were high enough to justify them not working, so they were enjoying leisure. Now, you take a look at the leisure activities of people in 1920s and 1932, and it was queuing up at soup kitchens. So it wasn't leisure.
Burning old clothes to keep warm, that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Having entertaining yourself by standing where I can open drum of a 44-gallon drum with wood inside it, burning.
Good times.
Good times. Party man, party central. So, but that is what they actually do. And Friedman was not the most extreme of the neoclassicals. He was sort of the trailblazer of this way of treating unemployment. But if you extrapolate from him through Lucas to two characters who dreamt up the whole idea of the neoclassical approach to macroeconomics these days, which started with what they call real business cycle models, they argued quite literally that the Great Depression was a period where workers preferred leisure over work.
Crazy stuff.
Unknown reasons due to changes, unknown changes in the in social arrangements that affected the unemployment rate.
Let that be a warning to all of us. If you have a good time, then a Great Depression is on the way. But a Great Depression is a good thing because it means more leisure time. That's basically what I'm saying, isn't it? But look,
yeah, I know. People might not believe that. So while we chat, I'm going to see if I can find that actual quote.
But Friedman's argument, I'm just seeing how this, still trying to figure out how this relates to employment, because the crux of what he was saying was if more money is created because, either because interest rates are low and we borrow more, so I can get cheap money, or the government spends more money, which has been created by the central bank. However we get more money created, I'll get to a point where I have more disposable income, which means I spend more on stuff, which is a good thing for the economy. But of course, that money that I spend is income to someone else. They'll have more to spend. So in other words, we're seeing money circulate more as well. So we've got an upward spiral, and it's that upward spiral which is pushing prices up, irrespective of the level of employment.
Yeah, this is the paper in which Milton invented this world was called the optimum quantity of money. Yeah. And that's where the idea of helicopter money comes from, because what he did was fantasized about a world in which there was 1,000 $1 bills circulating in this economy about, I think it was 12 times a year. So $1,000 of money generated $12,000 worth of GDP. And then one day, and all prices, all markets were in perfect equilibrium. So all the goods markets were supply equals demand, the labor market, supply equals demand. All prices were balanced. And then this money drops out of this mysterious helicopter, and people rush about and pick up the money, and they're holding a certain fraction of the money in their pockets as a they want to have a certain balance. Yeah. The individuals want to have a certain balance of money in their pockets. So when you have this extra
discretionary money that they've got,
money because you need to go shopping. You've got money ready for transactions. Yeah. Okay? So you got this transactional money, and let's say for each person, let's say there's 1,000 people in the world. So we're talking dropping 1 cent coins out of the helicopter to make it divisible, but nonetheless, $1,000 worth of 1 cent coins. Everybody's carrying 100 cents in their pockets, and these coins fall out of the sky.
It'll be pummeled to death, by the way.
That's a good idea, frankly, with this particular. I want to pummel Milton to death.
So it all going to be $1,000 in 1p pieces coming through the.
That's right. Yeah. So everybody rushes about. On average, everybody now has 2 of those dollars in their pockets, and they're spending them, as I said, 12 times a year. So the total level of monetary demand rises from $12,000 per year to $24,000 per year. Yeah. Now, initially, this is where he let the side down. He let the neoclassical side down here, and they remedied it later. What he said was, well, people would initially regard this as like a doubling of their effective
income. Wealth. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you've got twice as much and you spend twice as much. Now, initially, people think, oh, this is genuine extra demand. Yeah. So everybody tries to produce more widgets and workers expect a higher wage, et cetera, et cetera.
But eventually we realise that all that money is worth half as much now because there's twice as much of it.
Yeah. So what happens, you have an initial increase in economic activity. Yeah. And then when people realise that then prices rise because you've got rising marginal cost, but then another little economic fallacy they use regularly. So prices rise, and therefore what happens over time, you go from an initial boost from the extra injection of money to a higher level of the price level.
So that's what Friedman said. So if you want to hear the counter to that, where did Friedman get it wrong? You'll need to listen to the full version of this podcast. To do that, you need to subscribe at debunkingeconomics.com or become a supporter of Steve Keen on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Prof Steve Keen and get access to the full version of this podcast and all the other podcasts we've recorded as well. That's it for this time. See you again next time. Thanks for listening.